Trust is the foundation of family. It's what allows us to be vulnerable, to share our deepest fears, to weather life's storms together. For 68 years, I believed my family would always be my safe harbor, especially my only son, Thomas, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for. But sometimes the people who should protect you the most become the very ones who betray you the deepest. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never imagined that my own son would threaten to have me declared mentally incompetent and placed in state care. The same son who drives a luxury sedan purchased with funds from my account. The same son who lives in a beautiful home that I helped finance. The son who once promised his father on his deathbed that he would always look after me. They say a mother's love knows no bounds. I've certainly tested the limits of that saying throughout my life. My name is Margaret Wilson, Maggie to those who know me well. And at 68, I thought I understood what family meant. My husband Robert and I raised our son Thomas with everything we had. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we gave him our time, our love, and every opportunity we could afford. Robert was a high school science teacher, beloved by his students and respected in our community. I worked as a nurse at Riverside Community Hospital for over 30 years. We lived modestly in our 3-bedroom home on Maple Street, saved diligently, and believed in the value of education and hard work. These weren't just abstract principles. They were the foundation of our daily lives. We clipped coupons, drove our cars until they practically fell apart, and put money aside every month for Thomas's college fund. I still remember the day Thomas was accepted to Westridge University. The pride that swelled in my chest nearly overwhelmed me. He was the first in either of our families to attend such a prestigious school. Robert and I sat at our kitchen table that night, after Thomas had gone to bed, and calculated how we could make it work financially. We'd need to refinance the house. I'd pick up extra shifts at the hospital. Robert would teach summer school and tutor on weekends. It would be tight, but we agreed. Our son was worth every sacrifice. He's going to have opportunities we never dreamed of, Maggie, Robert said, his eyes shining with tears of pride. Just imagine what he'll accomplish. Thomas thrived at university. His calls home became less frequent as he immersed himself in his business courses and the social life that came with them. When he did call, his voice brimmed with excitement about new concepts, new friends, new experiences. He was particularly animated when describing the business connections he was making. Sons and daughters of executives, future entrepreneurs, people with real influence, as he put it. "These are the kinds of people who make things happen, Mom," he'd say, his voice buzzing with an energy I hadn't heard before. "They know how the world really works." I was happy for him, truly, but something in his tone, a subtle dismissiveness of our modest life, a growing preoccupation with status and appearance, planted a small seed of unease in my heart. I pushed it aside, attributing it to the natural separation that comes with growing up. All parents must learn to let go, I told myself. All children must find their own path. It was during his junior year that Thomas met Jennifer Summers. When he first mentioned her, he led with her family connections before describing anything about her personality. Her father runs Summers Investment Group, Mom. They have a lake house in Michigan and a winter home in Florida. Can you believe it? The excitement in his voice was undeniable, but I found myself asking, and what is she studying? What are her interests? Thomas paused as if the question surprised him. Oh, she's in the business program too. Marketing, I think. She plays tennis and her family belongs to the Oak Ridge Country Club. When we finally met Jennifer at Thomas's graduation, she was polite but distant. She complimented our quaint hometown and seemed surprised that I had worked as a nurse. How interesting. I thought healthcare workers made so little, she remarked, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her champagne flute. Robert, always the diplomat, smoothly changed the subject, but I noticed how Thomas tensed at her comment, how quickly he steered the conversation toward her father's recent business acquisition. Later that night in our hotel room, I mentioned my concerns to Robert. "She seems very focused on material things," I said carefully, knowing how much Thomas's happiness meant to him. Robert sighed, settling onto the edge of the bed. "She's young, Maggie. They both are. They'll figure out what really matters in time." I wanted to believe him. Robert had always been the optimist in our relationship, always able to see the best in people. It was one of the countless reasons I had loved him for nearly 40 years. 6 months after graduation, Thomas and Jennifer were engaged. The wedding was held at the Summers Lake House in Michigan, a sprawling property with manicured gardens and a view that took my breath away. It was beautiful, certainly, but I felt out of place among the guests in their designer clothes, discussing vacation, homes and stock portfolios. Robert and I were seated at a table far from the main party, with distant relatives and what felt like other obligatory invitees. "Don't take it personally," Robert whispered, squeezing my hand under the table. "It's just seating arrangements." But when Thomas barely spoke to us during the reception, when he failed to mention us in his speech thanking the Summers family for welcoming him into their world, the hurt was impossible to ignore. The years that followed brought a growing distance. Thomas and Jennifer bought a house in Oak Ridge Estates, the most exclusive neighborhood in Riverside. He joined his father-in-law's investment firm and quickly rose through the ranks. Their social media pages showed glamorous vacations, charity galas, tennis tournaments at the country club. Our invitations to visit became less frequent, always, with conditions attached. "Don't bring those homemade cookies, Mom. We're trying to eat clean. Maybe wear something a bit more current? The Hendersons will be there, and they're very image-conscious." Each request chipped away at my confidence, at my sense of place in my son's life. But I complied, wanting desperately to maintain whatever connection remained. Robert, ever my rock, reminded me that Thomas was finding his way, establishing his identity. "He'll remember what matters, Maggie. Just give him time." Then Robert was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim from the start. 6 months, perhaps a year with aggressive treatment. My world collapsed around me. For 3 decades, this man had been my partner in everything, my confidant, my compass. The thought of navigating life without him seemed impossible. Thomas's response to his father's illness was practical, detached. He arranged for a second opinion with a specialist, offered to help with medical bills, called once a week for updates. But he rarely visited. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Always an excuse. A big client meeting, a conference, a commitment at the country club. "He's busy, Maggie," Robert would say, always defending our son. "He has his own life to manage. Don't be so hard on him." Even in his suffering, Robert protected Thomas, made excuses for his absence. It broke my heart in ways I couldn't express. 3 months after his diagnosis, Robert's condition deteriorated rapidly. I called Thomas on a Wednesday evening, my voice shaking as I told him the doctors didn't think his father would make it through the weekend. "You need to come now," I said, no longer able to soften the truth. "If you want to say goodbye, it needs to be now." Thomas arrived the following evening, Jennifer in tow. She stayed for approximately 20 minutes before claiming a headache and returning to their hotel. Thomas sat by his father's bedside, uncomfortable in the face of mortality, checking his phone every few minutes. "Son," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper, reaching for Thomas's hand. "Promise me you'll look after your mother." Thomas nodded, his eyes finally meeting his father's. "Of course, Dad. I promise." Robert died the next morning, with me by his side. Thomas had already returned to his hotel to get some proper rest. He came back around noon, after I'd already been sitting with Robert's body for hours, arranging the funeral with the hospital chaplain, making impossible decisions on my own because my son hadn't answered his phone. The funeral was exactly what Robert would have wanted: simple, meaningful, filled with former students and colleagues whose lives he'd touched. Thomas delivered a brief but appropriate eulogy, and I was momentarily heartened by his presence at my side as we received condolences. But he and Jennifer left immediately after the service, citing an important dinner they couldn't miss. "I'll call you tomorrow, Mom," he promised, kissing my cheek quickly before sliding into his BMW. I stood in the cemetery parking lot, surrounded by friends offering to take me home, to stay with me, to provide the comfort my own son couldn't seem to offer. The days after Robert's funeral passed in a fog. Friends brought food, sat with me, helped sort through practical matters. My sister Catherine came to stay for 2 weeks, her quiet presence a balm to my raw grief. Thomas called occasionally, always brief, always with an undercurrent of impatience. When he did visit, it was clearly out of obligation, his eyes constantly checking the time. 6 months after Robert's death, the practical realities of my new life began to crystallize. Our house felt too large, too full of memories. The maintenance was becoming difficult to manage alone. After much consideration, I decided to sell and move to Sunset Apartments, a modest but pleasant senior living complex closer to the hospital where I'd worked for so many years. The decision seemed to trigger a renewed interest from Thomas. He called more frequently, inquired about the sale price, asked detailed questions about my financial plans. I was touched by his concern, assuming grief had finally caught up with him and he was finding his way back to being the son I remembered. "Mom," he said during Sunday brunch at the Riverside Cafe, "Dad left you well taken care of, right? The life insurance, the house equity, your savings?" I nodded, stirring my tea. "We were always careful with money. Not wealthy by your standards, but comfortable. The house should sell for a good price, and my pension plus Robert's life insurance will cover my needs." Thomas leaned forward, his expression serious. "You should let me help manage those funds. It's what I do professionally, after all. We could grow that money, make sure you're really secure." The offer seemed generous, thoughtful even. And wasn't this what I'd wanted? My son taking an interest in my well-being, honoring his promise to his father? I hesitated only briefly, before agreeing. "That's very kind, Thomas. Your father would be proud of you looking after me this way." The words felt right as I said them, but something in Thomas's quick smile, the satisfied way he sat back in his chair, sent a ripple of unease through me. I dismissed it as lingering grief, as the natural disorientation that comes with such profound loss. Within weeks, Thomas had arranged for me to grant him power of attorney, just in case anything happens, had persuaded me to add his name to my accounts for convenience, and had taken possession of all my financial documents to get a complete picture of your portfolio. "You shouldn't worry about these details, Mom," he said, his tone somewhere between solicitous and condescending. "It's stressful, and stress isn't good for someone your age. Let me handle everything." Your age. As if 68 made me incapable. As if a lifetime of managing a household, working full-time and raising him, hadn't proven my competence. Shortly after I moved into Sunset Apartments, Thomas and Jennifer announced they were expecting their first child. I was overjoyed. The prospect of a grandchild bringing the first real happiness I'd felt since Robert's death. When Emily was born, I dropped everything to help, spending weeks at their Oak Ridge home, cooking, cleaning, allowing Jennifer to rest and Thomas to maintain his busy work schedule. "We couldn't do this without you, Mom," Thomas said one evening, and the gratitude in his voice soothed years of hurt. For a time, things improved. My grandchildren, Emily and 2 years later Ryan, became the center of my world. I cared for them 3 days a week while Thomas and Jennifer worked, cherishing the opportunity to be an active presence in their lives. They brought laughter back into my days, purpose back into my routine. But gradually, I began noticing discrepancies in my financial situation, bills I didn't recognize, investment decisions made without my consultation, a significant withdrawal that Thomas vaguely attributed to portfolio rebalancing when I questioned it. "It's all very complicated, Mom," he said, his tone dismissive. "That's why you have me handling it. Everything's fine." I might have let it go, trusted my son, avoided conflict, if not for Catherine's persistent questions during her monthly visits. "Something doesn't add up, Maggie," she said, looking over the bank statement I'd managed to intercept before Thomas could take it. "These withdrawals, what are they for? And why is your name not on these investment accounts if they're your funds?" Concerned but still hesitant to believe the worst of my son, I made an appointment with Sarah Mitchell, an attorney Catherine recommended. Sarah listened carefully to my situation, her expression growing increasingly grave. "Mrs. Wilson, based on what you're describing, I'm concerned that your son may be misappropriating your funds," she said finally. "We need to get a complete picture of your accounts, and I'd recommend doing so discreetly, without alerting Thomas until we know exactly what we're dealing with." The investigation took weeks, painful, anxious weeks during which I maintained a facade of normalcy with Thomas. Each time he called or visited, I fought the urge to confront him, to demand answers. I continued caring for Emily and Ryan, treasuring those hours even as doubt and fear gnawed at me. What Sarah eventually uncovered shattered any remaining illusions. Thomas had systematically transferred nearly $200,000 from my accounts over the past 2 years. Money from Robert's life insurance, from our lifetime of careful saving, from the sale of the home where we'd raised our son. Some had gone into high-risk investments in his name only. Some had financed renovations on their Oak Ridge home. Some had purchased the sleek sedan Thomas drove so proudly, all without my knowledge or consent. "This is elder financial abuse, Mrs. Wilson," Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm. "It's not just unethical, it's illegal. You have options for how to proceed, but first, we need to secure your remaining assets." I sat in her office, documents spread before me, proof of my son's betrayal in black and white. I thought of Robert, of his faith in the boy we'd raised, of his final request that Thomas look after me. I thought of Emily and Ryan, innocent in all of this, their faces lighting up when I arrived to care for them. I thought of the thousands of small sacrifices Robert and I had made over the years, believing we were investing in a son who shared our values. The pain was physical, a weight crushing my chest, making it difficult to breathe. How had it come to this? When had Thomas become someone capable of stealing from his own mother, of exploiting her grief and trust? What had I done wrong in raising him that he could justify such actions? "I need time," I told Sarah, gathering the documents with trembling hands. "I need to think about how to handle this." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Take the time you need, but please be careful. Based on these patterns, Thomas isn't likely to stop unless confronted. And Mrs. Wilson, none of this is your fault." I left her office with a heavy heart, but a clear mind. The shock was giving way to something else, a slow-burning resolve, a determination to protect what remained of the life Robert and I had built together. I wasn't just fighting for my financial security now. I was fighting for justice, for accountability, for the values I still believed in, even if my son had abandoned them. What I couldn't know then was that Thomas had already sensed something was amiss, that he was already formulating his own plan, one that would involve questioning my mental competence, threatening to have me placed in state care, effectively erasing any claim I might make against him. That the confrontation to come would test every ounce of courage I possessed. As I drove back to Sunset Apartments that autumn afternoon, documents safely stored in my trunk, I felt a curious calm settling over me. Robert had always said I was stronger than I knew. It seemed the time had come to prove him right. The following Sunday, Thomas called to cancel our usual dinner. His voice held a strange edge, too casual, too controlled. "Actually, Mom, Jennifer, and I wanted to talk to you about something important. Could we stop by your place tomorrow evening? Around 6? "Of course," I replied, matching his tone. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," he said quickly. "Just some family matters to discuss." As I hung up, I knew with absolute certainty that the battle lines were being drawn. Whatever Thomas was planning, I would need to be prepared. I called Catherine immediately, then Sarah Mitchell. By Monday afternoon, I had a clear strategy and the documents to back it up. Sometimes the hardest fights are the ones against the people we love most. But as Robert always said, standing up for what's right isn't optional, Maggie. It's essential. I would stand up for myself, for Robert's memory, and yes, even for the son who had lost his way so completely that he would steal from his own mother. The Thomas who would arrive at my door the next evening was not the boy I had raised. But I was still the woman who had raised him, stronger than he remembered, wiser than he gave me credit for, and armed with the truth he thought I would never discover. Monday evening arrived with an unseasonable chill. I had spent the day preparing, reviewing. The documents Sarah had helped me gather, rehearsing what I would say, steadying my nerves with Catherine's reassuring phone calls. I set out coffee and the almond cookies Thomas had always loved as a child. A small, perhaps foolish gesture, but some part of me still hoped for reconciliation, for explanation, for the return of the son I had raised. The sharp knock at exactly 6 o'clock carried a formality that immediately set me on edge. Thomas never knocked that way. It was Jennifer's knock, precise and demanding. I opened the door to find them both standing there, Thomas in his charcoal business suit despite the late hour, Jennifer in a cream cashmere sweater that probably cost more than a month of my pension. Their expressions were carefully composed, with an undercurrent of tension that confirmed my suspicions. "Mom?" Thomas nodded, stepping inside without his usual brief hug. Jennifer followed, her gaze sweeping critically around my modest apartment, as if cataloging deficiencies. "I made coffee," I offered, gesturing toward the living room where I'd arranged everything on the coffee table. "And those almond cookies you used to love." Thomas's expression flickered. A brief softening quickly, replaced by determination. "We're not staying long, Mom. We need to discuss something important with you." "Of course," I replied, settling into my armchair as they perched uncomfortably on the edge of the sofa. "What's on your mind?" They exchanged a glance before Thomas leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees in a pose I recognized from his childhood. The way he sat when confessing to breaking a neighbor's window or failing a math test. But there was no contrition in his expression now, only calculated concern. "Mom, Jennifer and I have been worried about you lately," he began, his voice carefully modulated. "You've been showing signs of confusion, memory issues, poor decision-making." I kept my expression neutral, though my heart began pounding against my ribs. "Have I? I feel perfectly fine." Jennifer jumped in, her voice honeyed with false compassion. "Just last week, you forgot you were supposed to watch the children, and the time before that, you couldn't remember where you'd put your checkbook." "I didn't forget about the children," I corrected calmly. "You changed the day without telling me, then claimed we'd agreed to Wednesday all along. As for my checkbook, it was moved from my desk drawer to the kitchen cabinet. I wouldn't have put it there." Thomas waved his hand dismissively. "These are exactly the kinds of confabulations we're concerned about, Mom. Creating alternate explanations rather than acknowledging memory lapses." The clinical term, so rehearsed, so deliberately chosen, confirmed what I had suspected. This was not a spontaneous concern. This was a strategy. "We've spoken with Dr. Harris," Thomas continued, mentioning the director of the hospital where he had connections through Jennifer's charity work. He recommended a neurological evaluation. Actually, he's expecting you tomorrow morning. You made a medical appointment for me without my consent? I asked, allowing a hint of indignation to color my tone. Because we care about you, Margaret, Jennifer interjected, using my full name as she always did, a subtle distancing mechanism. And frankly, because we're concerned about your ability to continue living independently. There it was, the threat, thinly veiled but unmistakable. I took a slow, deliberate sip of coffee, buying myself a moment to control the anger rising in my chest. What exactly are you suggesting, Thomas? My son straightened, as if relieved to move past the pretense. There are excellent care facilities, Mom. Places where you'd have supervision, regular meals, medication management. We've toured Greenfield Manor. It's really quite nice. Private rooms, scheduled activities, trained staff. And who would make that decision? About whether I need such a place. Another glance between them. Well, if the neurological evaluation shows significant cognitive decline and you're deemed unable to make sound decisions for yourself, then as your power of attorney, I would have to act in my best interest? I finished for him, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Like you've been doing with my finances? His expression hardened slightly. What are you talking about? I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, Thomas. The withdrawals from my accounts. The investments in your name only. The money that paid for your Mercedes. The color drained from his face, but he recovered quickly. This is exactly what we're worried about, Mom. These paranoid accusations, these misunderstandings about financial matters that are too complex for you to... I may be many things, Thomas, but financially illiterate isn't one of them, I interrupted, rising from my chair to retrieve the folder I'd placed on the side table. I've been a nurse for 30 years. I managed our household finances while your father taught. I understand perfectly well when someone is stealing from me, even when that someone is my own son. Jennifer stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. Thomas has been managing your affairs out of the goodness of his heart. If anything, he's subsidizing your lifestyle. I almost laughed at the absurdity of her statement. My modest apartment, my 10-year-old car, my carefully budgeted life, subsidized by them? Please sit down, Jennifer, I said firmly. This conversation isn't finished. To my surprise, she complied, though her expression remained defiant. Thomas hadn't moved, his eyes fixed on the folder in my hands. What is that? He asked, his voice unnaturally flat. Documentation, I replied simply, opening the folder and removing the first set of papers. Bank statements showing withdrawals of $50,000 last March. Transfers to an account in your name only. Money from your father's life insurance policy that was meant to secure my retirement. I placed the papers on the coffee table between us, then removed another set. Mortgage statements for your Oak Ridge home showing a $75,000 payment toward principal in April of last year. Made, coincidentally, 2 days after a similar amount disappeared from my investment account. Thomas's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching. In his cheek, the same tell he'd had since childhood when caught in a lie. Those were investments I made on your behalf. If you'd let me explain? Please do, I said, leaning back in my chair. Explain how investments on my behalf ended, up in accounts I can't access. Explain how my money paid down your mortgage without my knowledge or consent. Mom, you're confused about this, he insisted, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his growing panic. We discussed all these financial moves. You agreed to them. The fact that you don't remember those conversations is exactly why we're concerned about your cognitive state. It was clever, I had to admit. Gaslighting at its finest, making me question my own memory, my own sanity. If I hadn't had the documents, would I have believed him? Would I have doubted myself, accepted their narrative of my declining mental capacity? That might be convincing, Thomas, if I didn't have this, I said, removing the final document from my folder. A complete forensic accounting of my finances since your father's death, prepared by an independent financial investigator hired by my attorney, Sarah Mitchell. Jennifer's sharp intake of breath was audible in the suddenly silent room. "You have an attorney?" Thomas asked, his facade of concern crumbling. "I do. And she's prepared to file charges for elder financial abuse if necessary. The penalty in Ohio, as I'm sure you're aware given your profession, includes jail time." Thomas stood now, pacing the small living room like a caged animal. "Mom, this is insane. You'd press charges against your own son. Over what? Financial decisions you don't understand? Conversations you've forgotten?" "I'd press charges against anyone who stole nearly $200,000 from me," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "The fact that it's my son, the son I sacrificed everything for, the son whose father made him promise to look after me, makes it worse, not better." Jennifer had pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen, likely texting someone for advice or backup. Thomas continued pacing, running his hand through his hair in a gesture so reminiscent of Robert that my heart ached despite everything. "What do you want?" he finally asked, stopping to face me. "Money back? An apology? What's the endgame here, Mom?" The question surprised me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. In Thomas's world, the world of business deals and strategic moves, everything was a negotiation. Everything had an angle. The concept of simply wanting justice, of wanting acknowledgement of wrongdoing, seemed foreign to him. "I want several things," I said after a moment. "I want full control of my finances returned to me immediately. I want accurate accounting of every dollar that's been taken and a repayment plan. I want the power of attorney document rescinded. And yes, Thomas, I want an apology. Not just to me, but to your father's memory." He flinched at the mention of Robert, a reaction I noted with grim satisfaction. Some part of him still carried guilt about breaking that deathbed promise. "And if I agree to these terms, you won't press charges?" "If you comply fully and immediately, I'll consider this a family matter to be resolved privately." Jennifer finally looked up from her phone. "This is blackmail. We could fight this, Thomas." "Your mother's mental state is perfectly sound," I interrupted, "as numerous witnesses, including my sister Catherine, my attorney, and my regular physician Dr. Reynolds, will testify. And I have a neurological evaluation from last month, a real one, not the sham you've arranged for tomorrow, showing no cognitive impairment whatsoever." I hadn't mentioned this evaluation to them before, having undergone it at Catherine's suggestion when we first suspected something was wrong. The shock on their faces confirmed it was a powerful card to play. "You planned this," Thomas said, his tone accusatory but tinged with grudging respect. "You knew what we were going to say." "I suspected," I corrected, "when people start embezzling money, they often try to discredit the victim. Especially when that victim is an older woman whose claims might be dismissed as confusion or paranoia. The strategy was so transparent in retrospect. Gradually isolate me from others, create small incidents to document supposed confusion, then use the power of attorney to declare me incompetent and gain complete control of my assets. The care facility was just window dressing, a convenient place to stash me while they liquidated what remained of my life savings." Thomas and Jennifer exchanged another glance, a silent communication that ended with Jennifer's slight nod. Whatever backup plan they might have considered was apparently deemed too risky. "Fine," Thomas said, his voice clipped. "I'll transfer everything back to your name. Set up a repayment plan for the rest. But Mom, you have to understand, I was going to pay it all back. It was just temporary. I had investments lined up that would have Doubled my money? I finished for him. Made everything right? Justified the theft? Please don't insult my intelligence with these excuses, Thomas. He fell silent, the rehearsed justification dying on his lips. I want everything in writing, I continued. Signed and notarized, Sarah Mitchell will draw up the agreement, and I want it completed within the week. A week? That's not enough time to... It's more than enough time to sign papers and transfer accounts, I said firmly. Unless you're planning to delay in hopes of finding another angle. Jennifer stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. We came here out of concern for your well-being, and you ambush us with accusations and threats. No, Jennifer, I corrected, standing to face her directly. You came here to have me declared incompetent so my son could continue stealing from me without consequence. The fact that you're both so shocked to discover I'm not a helpless old woman to be manipulated speaks volumes about how little you know me. She flushed, whether from anger or embarrassment I couldn't tell. Thomas, we're leaving. Our attorney will contact Mrs. Wilson's attorney. She said the last word as if it tasted bitter, unable to believe someone like me, someone she had always regarded as insignificant, would have such resources. Thomas hesitated, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Anger, certainly, but also something else. Surprise, perhaps. Even a hint of the respect that had been absent from his demeanor for so long. What about the children? He asked finally. Emily and Ryan adore you. The implied threat that I might lose access to my grandchildren as punishment for standing up to him struck deeper than he knew. Those children were my connection to Robert, to the values we had tried to instill, to the future we had imagined. The thought of losing them left me breathless with grief. But I wouldn't be manipulated, not even with this most precious leverage. I love Emily and Ryan more than words can express, I said, keeping my voice steady through sheer force of will. And I hope you're not suggesting you would use your children as pawns in this situation. That would be a new low, even for you. He had the grace to look ashamed. Of course not. I just meant, things will be awkward. Only if you make them so, I replied. Children are resilient, but they also sense dishonesty. Right now, they believe their father is a good man. I'd like them to keep believing that, which means you need to start acting like one. The words hung in the air between us, a challenge and an opportunity. For a moment, just a breath, really, I glimpsed the son I remembered, the boy with Robert's moral compass and sense of responsibility. But it vanished quickly, replaced by the hardened businessman who had calculated that his mother's assets were worth the risk of stealing. We'll have our attorney contact yours, he said finally, turning toward the door where Jennifer already waited impatiently. Goodbye, Mom. No hug, no further discussion, just the formal farewell of business associates concluding an unsuccessful negotiation. I watched them leave, their figures retreating down the hallway of Sunset Apartments, and felt an odd mixture of victory and devastating loss. When the door closed behind them, I sank back into my armchair, suddenly exhausted. The folder of evidence sat on the coffee table alongside the untouched almond cookies. The apartment felt emptier than it ever had, the silence oppressive, the evening stretching before me like a vast, desolate plain. I had won this battle, but at what cost? My relationship with my only child lay in ruins. My grandchildren might become collateral damage in a war they couldn't understand. The future. I had imagined family dinners, holiday gatherings, the natural flow of generations supporting each other, seemed impossible now. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Catherine's name flashed on the screen. Well? She asked without preamble. How did it go? I took a deep breath, gathering my scattered emotions. About as expected. They tried to have me declared incompetent. I presented the evidence. They backed down. Oh, Maggie, she sighed. her voice thick with shared pain. "I'm so sorry it came to this. You did the right thing, you know. Robert would be proud of you standing up for yourself." Would he? I wondered aloud. Or would he think I should have found another way? Something that didn't involve threatening our son with criminal charges? Robert valued honesty above all else, Catherine reminded me gently. He wouldn't have wanted Thomas to get away with this, no matter the family connection. And he certainly wouldn't have wanted you destitute and locked away in some facility while Thomas spent your life savings. She was right, of course. Robert's moral compass had always pointed true, even when the path was difficult. He would have been heartbroken by Thomas's actions, but he would have insisted on accountability. "The hardest lessons are often the most important ones," he used to say when Thomas faced consequences for childhood transgressions. "I know," I acknowledged. "It's just, I keep wondering where we went wrong, Kathy. How did we raise a son? Who could do this? Who could look at his widowed mother and see only dollar signs?" "You didn't go wrong," she insisted. "Some people make their own choices, regardless of their upbringing. Thomas has been surrounded by wealth and status through Jennifer and her family. He's been taught that money equals worth. That's a powerful influence, especially for someone who always felt he had something to prove." We talked for nearly an hour, Catherine's steady presence a balm to my wounded spirit. By the time we hung up, I felt stronger, more certain of my path forward. Thomas had made his choices. Now he would face the consequences, not out of vengeance, but out of justice. Out of respect for the values Robert and I had lived by, even if our son had abandoned them. The next morning, I called Sarah Mitchell to brief her on the confrontation and set the legal process in motion. She was pleased but cautious. "They agreed too easily," she noted. "Be prepared for them to try something else. People who are willing to steal from family rarely give up at the first obstacle." "What more could they do?" I asked. "I have the evidence. I've revoked the power of attorney. I've had a neurological evaluation confirming my competence." "Just be vigilant," she advised. "Document everything. And Maggie, change your locks. Today." The suggestion startled me. It seemed extreme, paranoid even. But Sarah had seen these situations before, had witnessed the lengths people would go to when money and reputation were at stake. I called the building superintendent that afternoon and had the locks changed, feeling slightly foolish but reassured. 3 days passed with no word from Thomas or Jennifer. No calls, no emails, no legal correspondence. The silence was unsettling, each day of inaction increasing my anxiety. Had they simply decided to comply with my demands? Were they consulting with attorneys about options I hadn't anticipated? Or were they planning something more concerning? On the 4th day, as I returned from grocery shopping, I found Emily and Ryan waiting outside my apartment door, accompanied by their regular babysitter, Melissa. "Grandma!" they cried in unison, rushing to embrace me with the uninhibited affection of childhood. My heart swelled despite my confusion. "What a wonderful surprise," I managed, looking questioningly at Melissa over their heads. She shrugged apologetically. "Mr. Wilson asked me to bring them here after school. He said you were expecting them and would watch them until 7. I can stay if there's been a miscommunication." It was a test, I realized immediately. Thomas was probing to see if I would forget an arrangement that had never been made, creating evidence of the confusion he had claimed existed. Or perhaps he genuinely thought I would refuse to see my grandchildren, giving him grounds to portray me as unstable or vindictive. "No miscommunication at all," I assured Melissa smoothly, unlocking my door. "I'm thrilled to have them. 7 o'clock is perfect." Emily and Ryan bounded into the apartment, already chattering about their day at school, oblivious to the undercurrents of adult manipulation. Melissa looked relieved and departed with a cheerful wave, leaving me alone with my grandchildren, and the knowledge that this innocent visit was something more calculated. I spent the next 3 hours in a state of hypervigilance, simultaneously enjoying the children's company and analyzing every interaction for potential misinterpretation. When Ryan mentioned a promise I'd supposedly made about a trip to the zoo, I responded carefully, neither confirming nor denying, steering the conversation to what animals he hoped to see someday. When Emily asked if I remembered what she'd worn to school last time she visited, a detail I couldn't possibly recall, I deflected by asking about her current favorite outfits. It was exhausting, this constant awareness that ordinary conversations might become ammunition. But beneath the strategic thinking, my time with Emily and Ryan remained precious. We baked chocolate chip cookies, read stories, built elaborate structures with the building blocks I kept for their visits. In these activities, in Emily's thoughtful questions and Ryan's exuberant laughter, I found echoes of the family we had been, of the values Robert and I had tried to instill. At precisely 7 o'clock, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find not Thomas or Jennifer, but Harold Summers, Jennifer's father, a man I had met only a handful of times at formal family gatherings. His imposing figure filled my doorway, his expression a mixture of discomfort and determination. "Margaret," he nodded curtly. "I'm here to collect the children." "Grandpa Summers!" Emily and Ryan exclaimed, running to greet him with hugs that he returned stiffly, his expensive suit creating a barrier between him and their enthusiastic affection. "Get your things," he instructed them. "Your parents are waiting." As the children gathered their backpacks, Harold remained in the doorway, his gaze sweeping critically around my apartment, much as Jennifer's had days earlier. "Thomas and Jennifer have explained the situation," he said, his voice low enough that the children couldn't hear. "I want you to know that the Summers family stands behind them completely. Whatever delusions you're experiencing—" "With all due respect, Mr. Summers," I interrupted quietly but firmly, "you have been misinformed. This isn't about delusions. It's about financial misconduct that has been thoroughly documented. But I have no intention of discussing this in front of the children." His eyes narrowed slightly, surprised by my directness. Like his daughter, he had clearly expected a meek, easily intimidated older woman. "The Summers name carries significant weight in this community," he continued, the implied threat unmistakable. "In banking, in healthcare, in legal circles, that's worth remembering." Before I could respond, Emily and Ryan returned, backpacks in hand, oblivious to the tension between the adults. "Bye, Grandma," they called cheerfully. "We had the best time." "Goodbye, darlings," I replied, bending to hug them each in turn. "I love you both so much." Harold ushered them out quickly, but not before giving me a final, meaningful look. A warning, a reminder of the power dynamics at play. The message was clear. This wasn't just about Thomas and Jennifer anymore. The entire Summers family, with their connections and influence, now stood against me. I closed the door behind them, my momentary victory suddenly feeling hollow. I had anticipated Thomas's schemes, had prepared for Jennifer's manipulations. But the full weight of the Summers family, with their tentacles reaching into every corner of Riverside's establishment, that was an opponent I hadn't fully considered. I called Catherine immediately, then Sarah Mitchell. Plans were adjusted, strategies reconsidered. Sarah would file our legal documents first thing in the morning, establishing an official record before the Summers family could exert whatever influence they might have. Catherine would arrive tomorrow to stay with me for a few days, providing both moral support and a witness to any further incidents. That night, as I lay awake replaying the confrontation with Thomas and Jennifer, analyzing Harold's veiled threats, I found myself thinking of Robert. What would he do in this situation? How would he navigate this treacherous path between justice and family, between standing firm and finding peace? Robert had always chosen integrity, even when it was difficult. even when it cost him friendships or opportunities. "You can compromise on many things," he often told Thomas, "but never on your principles. Those define who you are." Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Summers family would use their influence. Thomas would continue his manipulations. Access to my grandchildren might become a bargaining chip in this increasingly complex negotiation. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of my apartment, I made a promise to Robert's memory and to myself. I would not be bullied, manipulated, or deceived into surrendering what was rightfully mine. Not my assets, not my dignity, and most certainly, not my truth. The battle lines had been drawn more clearly now. Thomas had escalated by involving his in-laws, using my grandchildren as unwitting pawns in his scheme. But he had underestimated me, just as he had been doing for years. He saw only an aging widow, vulnerable in her grief and isolation. He failed to see the woman who had worked 30 years in a hospital, managing emergencies and making life or death decisions. The woman who had raised him despite financial constraints. The woman who had loved and been loved by Robert Wilson, a man who never backed down from doing what was right. That woman, that fighter, was still very much alive. And she was just getting started. Catherine arrived the following morning with a determination that matched my own. She had always been the practical one between us, organized, strategic, unafraid of confrontation. While I had dedicated my life to nurturing others as a nurse and mother, Catherine had built a successful career in human resources, navigating corporate politics with a keen eye for manipulation and power plays. Her experience would prove invaluable in the days ahead. "Harold Summers doesn't intimidate me," she announced as she unpacked in my spare bedroom. "I've dealt with men like him my entire career. Wealthy, entitled, used to getting their way. They fold quickly when faced with someone who won't be bullied." I wished I shared her confidence. The Summers name adorned buildings throughout Riverside. The Summers wing at the hospital where I'd worked, the Summers Business Center at the local university, the Summers Gallery at the Art Museum. Their influence wasn't just financial. It was woven into the very fabric of our community. "It's not just Harold," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "It's the way Thomas used the children yesterday. Testing me, watching for any sign of confusion or forgetfulness he could use against me." Catherine's expression hardened. "Using children as pawns, that's low, even for Thomas." She zipped her suitcase with unnecessary force. "We need to document everything. Every interaction, every phone call, every visit. If they're trying to build a case against your competence, we'll build a stronger one proving their manipulation." Sarah Mitchell called mid-morning with news that our legal filings were complete. The court had officially recorded my revocation of Thomas's power of attorney and established formal documentation of his unauthorized use of my funds. It was a crucial first step, creating a paper trail that would be difficult for even the Summers family to erase. "I've also filed for an emergency injunction to freeze any accounts where your name appears," Sarah explained. "We can't recover what's already been taken without further legal action, but we can prevent any additional withdrawals while we negotiate a settlement." "How long will that take?" I asked, thinking of the nearly $200,000 that had already disappeared. "Honestly, it depends on how hard they want to fight. If they're reasonable, we could have a settlement within weeks. If they resist, it could be months of legal battles." She paused. "And Margaret, you should prepare yourself for the possibility that we might not recover everything. Thomas had legal access to those accounts, even if he abused that access. Some judges might view this as a family matter rather than criminal theft. It wasn't about the money, not entirely. Yes, those funds represented my security, my independence, my future. But more importantly, they represented the life Robert and I had built together, the careful stewardship of resources we had practiced so that we would never be a burden to others in our old age. Thomas hadn't just stolen dollars. He had stolen The embodiment of our values, our planning, our care for each other. I understand, I told Sarah, but I want to pursue this as far as necessary. Not just for the money, but for the principle. The doorbell rang shortly after noon. Catherine and I exchanged glances, neither of us expecting visitors. Through the peephole, I saw Dr. Reynolds, my longtime physician and friend, standing in the hallway, his expression troubled. "James," I greeted him, genuinely surprised. "What brings you here?" He stepped inside, declining my offer of coffee with a quick shake of his head. "This isn't a social call, I'm afraid. I received a rather concerning phone call this morning from Dr. Harris at Riverside Memorial." The hospital director Thomas had mentioned, the one who had supposedly arranged a neurological evaluation without my knowledge or consent. "Let me guess," Catherine interjected. "He's concerned about my sister's cognitive status?" Dr. Reynolds nodded grimly. "He claims to have received reports from family members about significant memory impairment, confusion, paranoia. He mentioned something about accusations of financial mismanagement." His tone made it clear he found these claims dubious. "That would be my son attempting to discredit me," I explained, gesturing for him to sit. After I confronted him about embezzling from my accounts, I gave him a condensed version of recent events, Thomas's systemic draining of my finances, the confrontation, the attempt to have me declared incompetent. Dr. Reynolds listened intently, his frown deepening with each new detail. "I've been your physician for nearly 20 years, Maggie," he said when I finished. "I've seen no signs of cognitive impairment whatsoever. Your last comprehensive physical was just 3 months ago. Including cognitive screening, everything was normal." He shook his head in disgust. "For Dr. Harris to entertain these claims without consulting your medical records or speaking with your primary physician is highly irregular, not to mention unethical. The Summers family has significant influence. At Riverside Memorial," I reminded him, "Harold donated the entire cancer wing." "That doesn't place him above medical ethics," Dr. Reynolds stated firmly. "I've already expressed my concerns to Dr. Harris and made it clear that any evaluation of your cognitive status should be conducted by independent specialists with no connection to the Summers family. Furthermore, I've documented our conversation in your medical record and made note of these apparently strategic concerns about your competence arising only after you uncovered financial misconduct." His support brought tears to my eyes. In a community where the Summers name carried such weight, having respected professionals willing to stand against their influence felt like a vital lifeline. "Thank you, James," I said sincerely. "This means more than you know." "Don't thank me for doing what's right," he replied, rising to leave. "And Maggie, be careful. If they're willing to manipulate medical evaluations, they might try other approaches as well." After he left, Catherine and I spent the afternoon making calls to my bank, to the investment company where my retirement funds were held, to the credit bureaus to place fraud alerts on my accounts. We created a detailed timeline of Thomas's financial maneuvers, gathering every statement, every transfer record, every relevant document into a comprehensive file. "We need to think about your will," Catherine said as we organized the paperwork. "If Thomas is willing to steal from you while you're alive, he'll certainly expect to inherit everything when you're gone." It was a painful thought, but a necessary consideration. Robert and I had always assumed our modest estate would pass seamlessly to Thomas and eventually to our grandchildren. We had never imagined needing protections against our own son. "I'll speak with Sarah about revising it," I agreed. "But Kathy, what about Emily and Ryan? They're innocent in all this. I don't want them to suffer for their parents' actions." "There are ways to provide for them directly," she reassured me. "Trust funds that parents can't access, educational, accounts with designated purposes. We'll figure it out." The phone rang as evening approached. Jennifer's name appeared on the caller ID, causing my stomach to tighten with apprehension. I answered on speakerphone, with Catherine sitting beside, me as a witness. "Margaret," Jennifer began, her tone artificially pleasant, "I'm calling about the children. They've been asking for you, and we thought perhaps you'd like to have them for the weekend. Thomas and I have a charity gala Friday evening, and they always enjoy staying with you." The sudden reversal from threatening to accommodating was jarring. Just days ago, they had attempted to have me declared incompetent. Now they wanted me to babysit? "That's kind of you to think of me," I replied carefully. "I'm always happy to spend time with Emily and Ryan." "Wonderful. Thomas will drop them off Friday afternoon around 4. They can stay until Sunday morning. We have brunch with my parents at 11. The conversation ended quickly, leaving Catherine and me exchanging puzzled glances. "What are they playing at?" she wondered aloud. "First they try to have you declared incompetent, then they arrange for you to watch their children for an entire weekend? It's another test," realized. "They're hoping I'll slip up somehow, forget something important, mismanage the children's routine, anything they can document as evidence of confusion." "Or," Catherine suggested, "they're offering an olive branch. Maybe Thomas is reconsidering his position after your confrontation." I shook my head, remembering the calculated look in my son's eyes, the influence of the Summers family looming in the background. "No, this is strategic, but I'll be ready for whatever they're planning." Friday arrived with no further contact from Thomas or Jennifer. Catherine had extended her stay, unwilling to leave me alone while the situation remained volatile. Her presence was reassuring, a buffer against the isolation Thomas had gradually created around me in the months following Robert's death. At precisely 4 o'clock, a car pulled up outside my building. Not Thomas's Mercedes, but a town car with tinted windows. The driver, a professionally dressed young woman, escorted Emily and Ryan to my door with their weekend bags. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson send their apologies," she explained. "They were delayed at a meeting and asked me to bring the children. They said to tell you they'll call tonight to check in." Something felt off about the arrangement. In the past, Thomas or Jennifer had always dropped the children off personally, using those moments to inspect my apartment, to comment on my appearance or living conditions. This impersonal handoff via a hired driver represented a significant departure from their usual controlling approach. Once the children were settled, Emily drawing at the kitchen table, Ryan arranging his action figures in elaborate battle formations on the living room floor, I checked their bags. Everything seemed normal. Clothing, toiletries, the stuffed, rabbit Ryan couldn't sleep without, Emily's current favorite book. The call from Thomas came at exactly 7 o'clock, just as the children were finishing the simple dinner I had prepared. "How's everything going, Mom?" he asked, his tone casual, as if our confrontation had never happened. "The kids settling in okay?" "They're wonderful as always," I replied, matching his pretense of normalcy. "We've had dinner and we're planning to watch a movie before bedtime." Great," he said distractedly. "Oh, by the way, Ryan needs to take his medication at bedtime. It's in his toiletry bag. Just 1 pill with water. It's new for his allergies. Doctor's orders." Alarm bells immediately rang in my mind. Ryan had no known allergies. Neither Thomas nor Jennifer had mentioned medication when arranging this visit. And most concerning of all, I had checked his toiletry bag upon arrival and seen no prescription bottle. "That's odd," I said carefully. "There's no medication in his bag, and I wasn't aware Ryan had developed allergies." A pause on the line, brief but noticeable. "Are you sure you checked thoroughly? It should be there. Small white pill bottle with his name on it." "Let me look again," I offered, signaling to Catherine to keep an eye on the children while I went to check the bag once more. As expected, there was no medication, no prescription bottle of any kind. "Thomas, there's definitely no medication." "Here," I stated firmly. "If Ryan needs something for allergies, you'll need to bring it over." Another pause, longer this time. I could have sworn I packed it. "Let me call Jennifer and see if she has it," I'll call you right back." He hung up without waiting for my response. Catherine joined me in the bedroom, keeping her voice low. "What was that about?" "He claimed Ryan needs allergy medication, but there's nothing in his bag. And Ryan has never had allergies." Catherine's expression darkened. "They're setting you up. If you had agreed that the medication was there, they could claim you were confused, seeing things that weren't real. If you had given Ryan some random pill from your own medicine cabinet thinking it was his prescription." The implications were chilling. Thomas wasn't just testing me now. He was actively trying to create situations that would support his claims about my mental state. And he was willing to involve his children in these schemes, potentially putting Ryan at risk if I had been less vigilant. "I need to document this," I said, reaching for my phone. I sent a text message to Sarah Mitchell describing the interaction, then took photos of Ryan's bag and its contents, establishing that no medication was present. Thomas called back 20 minutes later. "False alarm," he said lightly. "Jennifer has the medication with her. Ryan can skip it for one night. It's not critical." "Thomas," I said, keeping my voice level despite my growing anger, "I think we both know there was never any medication. This was a test, wasn't it? To see if I would claim to see something that wasn't there, or give Ryan some random pill from my own supplies." Silence on the line then. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mom. You're sounding paranoid again. This is exactly what we're worried about." "I've documented this entire interaction," I informed him. "My sister is here as a witness. My attorney has been notified. If you continue these attempts to manipulate situations to question my competence, we'll add harassment to the legal complaints we're already pursuing." He hung up without responding. Catherine and I exchanged grim looks, both understanding that the conflict had just escalated significantly. Thomas wasn't simply defending himself against my accusations of financial misconduct. He was actively working to discredit me, using increasingly concerning tactics. "We should take the children home," Catherine suggested. "If they're willing to use them this way, who knows what else they might try over the weekend." I considered her advice, torn between protecting myself and disappointing my grandchildren. Emily and Ryan had been looking forward to this visit. They were innocent participants in their parents' schemes, and returning them early would require explanations I wasn't prepared to give. "No," I decided finally. "We'll continue as planned, but we'll document everything, take photos, keep detailed notes of all interactions, and you'll stay with us the entire time as a witness." The weekend proceeded without further incident. Thomas called again Saturday evening, his tone once more artificially casual, as if the medication incident had never occurred. I remained, cordial but vigilant, aware that every interaction was potentially being recorded or monitored for signs of the confusion he was so determined to establish. Sunday morning arrived, and I prepared the children to return home for their brunch with the Summers family. As we gathered their belongings, Emily handed me a folded piece of paper. "I made this for you, Grandma," she said proudly. "It's our family." The drawing showed 5 figures standing together: Thomas, Jennifer, Emily, Ryan, and me. Unlike the typical family portraits children draw with smiling faces and holding hands, this one showed large speech bubbles filled with angry-looking scribbles between the adult figures. "This is beautiful, sweetheart," I said, studying the image with concern. "Can you tell me about these speech bubbles?" Emily shrugged. "That's the fighting words. Daddy and Mommy fight about you a lot now. Daddy says Grandma is causing problems. Mommy says they need to be more careful." My heart sank. Despite our efforts to shield the children from the conflict, they were clearly aware of the tension. The innocence of Emily's drawing revealed the harsh reality of arguments happening behind closed doors, discussions of being more careful that suggested their schemes continued. "Does the fighting scare you?" I asked gently. She considered. This head tilted thoughtfully. "Not scared, but sad. I don't like when Daddy's face gets all red and tight, and I don't like when they stop talking when we come in the room. I hugged her close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair, fighting back tears. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about important things, Emily, but I want you to know that everyone in this family loves you and Ryan very much. The disagreements are never about you. The town car arrived precisely at 10:30. I helped the children gather their belongings, giving each a tight hug before sending them off with the same professional driver who had delivered them. As they drove away, I felt the familiar ache of separation, intensified now by the knowledge that these visits might become increasingly complicated as the legal battle with Thomas progressed. Catherine placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "They'll be all right, Maggie. Children are resilient." Are they? I wondered aloud. Or do they just become adults who carry those childhood wounds with them, shaping their choices in ways they don't even recognize? Had that happened to Thomas? Had some failure in his upbringing, some moment where Robert and I fell short, created the man who could steal from his widowed mother, who could use his own children as pawns in his schemes? The thought haunted me as we returned to the apartment, the silence of their absence echoing through the rooms. Monday morning brought a certified letter from an attorney I didn't recognize. Preston Hamilton, of Hamilton, Reed and Associates, one of Riverside's most prestigious law firms. The kind of firm that represented the Summers family and others of their social standing. "Ms. Wilson," the letter began formally, "this office represents Thomas and Jennifer Wilson in the matter of Margaret Wilson's capacity for independent living and financial management. Our clients have expressed significant concerns about Ms. Wilson's cognitive status and decision-making abilities." The letter continued for several pages, outlining their intent to petition the court for guardianship proceedings, citing documented incidents of confusion, paranoia, and false accusations. It mentioned the medication incident from our weekend visit, completely reversed to claim that I had insisted medication was present when it wasn't. It referenced erratic financial decisions and unfounded accusations against family members who have only her best interests at heart. Catherine read over my shoulder, her face flushing with anger. "This is outrageous. They're completely twisting everything that's happened." I felt strangely calm as I reached the end of the letter, which invited me to resolve this matter privately, without the stress and public exposure of court proceedings. In other words, drop my claims about the embezzled funds and submit to their control, or face a public battle over my competence. "They're bluffing," I said, folding the letter carefully. "They know they can't win a legitimate evaluation of my cognitive status. This is about intimidation, about hoping I'll back down rather than fight. And they've hired the biggest legal guns in town," Catherine added grimly. "Hamilton doesn't come cheap. The Summers are clearly financing this." I called Sarah Mitchell, immediately, reading her the letter verbatim. Her response was measured but determined. "This is an aggressive move, but not unexpected," she said. "They're hoping to shift the narrative from Thomas's financial misconduct to questions about your mental capacity. It's a common tactic in these situations." How do we respond? Directly and forcefully. I'll file our own petition immediately, requesting that any evaluation of your capacity be conducted by independent specialists with no connection to the Summers family or Riverside Memorial. We'll also move forward with the financial misconduct claims, requesting an expedited hearing given these new developments. "And what are my chances?" I asked, needing her honest assessment. "In terms of the competency question? Excellent. You have recent medical evaluations, multiple witnesses to your clarity of thought, and documentation of their attempts to manipulate situations. For the financial recovery? More complex, but still solid. The paper trail is clear, even if Thomas had technical legal access to those accounts. After ending the call, I sat quietly at my kitchen table, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Catherine busied herself making coffee, giving me space to process this latest development. "He's still my son," I said finally, the words catching in my throat. "Despite everything, despite what he's done, he's still the boy I raised. The child Robert and I loved more than anything in this world." Catherine set a steaming mug in front of me, settling into the chair opposite. "Yes, he is. And that's what makes this so painful. But Maggie, loving him doesn't mean allowing him to steal from you, to manipulate you, to try to have you declared incompetent for his own gain." "I know," I acknowledged. "But I keep wondering if there's another way through this. Some path that doesn't lead to courts and lawyers and public battles. If there is, it would require Thomas to acknowledge what he's done and make genuine amends, to return what he's taken and stop these attempts to discredit you." Her expression was sympathetic but realistic. "Do you believe he's willing to, do that?" I thought of Thomas's face during our confrontation, the calculation in his eyes, the momentary flashes of the son I remembered overpowered by the influence of wealth and status he'd absorbed from the Summers family. I thought of the letter from Hamilton, the twisted version of events, the continued attempts to paint me as confused and paranoid. "No," I admitted sadly. "I don't think he's willing to do that. At least, not yet." "Then we fight," Catherine said simply. "Not out of vengeance or bitterness, but because it's the right thing to do. Because Robert would expect nothing less." The mention of Robert steadied me, as it always did. I could almost hear his voice, gentle but firm. "Stand your ground, Maggie. Not just for yourself, but for the principle of the thing. For what's right." That afternoon, Sarah filed our counter-petitions and sent a formal response to Hamilton, Reed, and Associates. The battle lines were drawn more clearly now, no longer a private family matter, but a legal conflict that would eventually become part of the public record. The thought of our dirty laundry being aired so publicly was deeply uncomfortable, but I refused to be bullied into silence or submission. As evening fell, I found myself drawn to the small box of Robert's personal items I kept beside my bed. Inside was his wedding ring, his favorite watch, the fountain pen I had given him on our 20th anniversary. And beneath these treasures, a small leather-bound journal he had kept sporadically throughout our marriage. I had read it only once since his death, finding both comfort and fresh grief in his private thoughts about our life together. Now I sought it again, searching for wisdom, for guidance in these troubled waters. Turning the pages carefully, I found an entry from shortly after Thomas's wedding to Jennifer. "I worry about Thomas, the influence of Jennifer's family, their focus on wealth and status seems to be pulling him away from the values Maggie and I tried to instill. But I have to trust that the foundation we built is strong enough to withstand this temporary seduction. He has a good heart. He'll find his way back to what truly matters." Robert's faith in our son had never wavered. He had seen Thomas's drift toward materialism and status-seeking as a temporary detour, not a permanent transformation. Was he right? Was there still hope for redemption, for reconciliation, for Thomas to find his way back to the values of his upbringing? I closed the journal, running my fingers over the worn leather cover that still held the imprint of Robert's hands. Whatever happened in the legal battles ahead, I would hold space for that possibility, that somewhere beneath the influence of wealth and power and the Summers family's values, the son we had raised still existed, that he might yet find his way back to what truly mattered. But I would not sacrifice my security, my dignity, or my principles in the meantime. Robert would have expected me to stand firm, to fight for what was right, even when, especially when, it was difficult. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Legal filings, responses from Hamilton, perhaps further attempts by Thomas to question my competence. But tonight, surrounded by memories of Robert, supported by Catherine's unwavering presence, I felt prepared for whatever came next. Not because I was unafraid, fear was certainly present, but because I was standing in my truth. And truth, as Robert often said, is the most powerful position from which to fight. The night deepened around me, quiet and still. In that stillness, I made a silent promise to Emily and Ryan. Whatever happened between their father and me, I would always be their grandmother. I would always represent the values Robert and I had lived by. And perhaps, through them, those values would continue, creating a legacy that transcended the current conflict, that honored the family we had once been and might, someday, be again. The official court date was set for 3 weeks away, May 15th, a Tuesday morning at the county courthouse. Both petitions would be heard by Judge Eleanor Simmons, a fair-minded jurist with a reputation for cutting through legal posturing to focus on the facts. Sarah Mitchell considered this a positive development, though she cautioned me that the summer's influence extended even to the judicial system. Judge Simmons is independent, but she's not immune to community pressure, Sarah explained during our preparation meeting. Harold Summers co-chaired her last re-election campaign. That doesn't mean she'll rule in their favor, but we need to be exceptionally well prepared. My life had transformed into a whirlwind of legal preparations. Daily conversations with Sarah, gathering additional documentation, preparing for the possibility of testifying. Catherine had returned to her home in Columbus but called every evening, maintaining our connection and offering strategic advice from her years in corporate negotiations. Meanwhile, I hadn't seen Emily and Ryan since that revealing weekend visit. My texts inquiring about them received brief, non-committal responses from Thomas. They're fine, busy with school activities. The distance was a calculated punishment, a reminder of what I stood to lose if I continued pursuing this case. 10 days before the hearing, I received an unexpected visitor. I was returning from grocery shopping, struggling with bags as I approached my building, when a familiar voice called my name. Mrs. Wilson? Maggie? Maria Delgado stood near the entrance, looking slightly uncertain. She had been Thomas and Jennifer's housekeeper for the past 5 years, a quiet, efficient woman who had always been kind during my visits to their home. Maria, I greeted her, genuinely surprised. Is everything all right? She glanced around nervously before stepping forward to take one of my grocery bags. May I help you with these? And perhaps we could talk privately? Upstairs in my apartment, Maria declined my offer of tea, perching anxiously on the edge of my sofa, still wearing her light jacket as if prepared for a quick departure. I shouldn't be here, she began, her voice low. If Mr. Thomas or Mrs. Jennifer knew I was speaking with you, whatever you tell me will remain confidential, I assured her. I would never put your position at risk. She nodded, seeming to gather her courage. I've worked for your son's family for 5 years. I've always been treated fairly, paid well. I need this job. My daughter is in college, her first year at Westridge. I understand, I said gently. Whatever brought you here must be important. It is. She met my eyes directly. Things have been strange at the house since your disagreement with Mr. Thomas. Many arguments behind closed doors, many visits from Mrs. Jennifer's parents. And yesterday, I overheard something I cannot ignore. My pulse quickened. What did you hear, Maria? Mr. Thomas and Mr. Harold were in the study. The door was partly open as I was cleaning nearby. Mr. Harold said, "The medical testimony is arranged. Dr. Harris has found a specialist willing to evaluate her without ever meeting her." And Mr. Thomas replied, "Are you sure it's legal?" And Mr. Harold laughed and said, "Legal enough for our purposes." Cold dread settled in my stomach. They were planning to present fabricated medical testimony about my cognitive status, an evaluation by a doctor who had never examined me. There's more, Maria continued. Mrs. Jennifer has been coaching the children on what to say if anyone asks them questions about you. Teaching Emily to say you forgot to give them dinner one night. that you got confused about what day it was. None of it happened, Mrs. Wilson. I've heard Emily protest, saying it's not true, but Mrs. Jennifer tells her it's just a game to help Grandma. Using the children this way crossed a line I hadn't thought even Thomas would breach. Manipulating innocent children, teaching them to lie about their grandmother, the cruelty and calculation of it stole my breath. "Why are you telling me this, Maria?" I asked finally. "You're risking your job." She straightened, dignity evident in her posture. "My mother raised me to know right from wrong, Mrs. Wilson. What they're doing to you is wrong. Using those children this way is wrong. My job is important, but I could not face my mother or myself if I remained silent." I reached across to squeeze her hand, deeply moved by her courage. "Thank you. This information may be crucial to stopping them." Maria left quickly after that, afraid of being missed at the house. I called Sarah Mitchell immediately, relaying everything Maria had shared. Her response was swift and decisive. "This changes our strategy," she said. "We need to request that any medical testimony be limited to doctors who have personally examined you with proper documentation of those examinations. And we need to file a motion to prevent the children from being called as witnesses, given evidence of coaching." Will Judge Simmons grant those motions? If we present Maria's testimony, very likely. The question is, will your housekeeper be willing to testify officially? Without that, it's hearsay. It was a significant question. Maria had taken an enormous risk just by coming to me. Testifying in court would almost certainly cost her the job she depended on. "I don't know," I admitted. "I can't ask her to sacrifice her livelihood, especially with her daughter in college." "Let me see what I can do without her direct testimony," Sarah said thoughtfully. "At minimum, we're now aware of their strategy and can prepare accordingly." That evening, alone in my apartment, I found myself sorting through old photographs, a habit I'd developed in the months since Robert's death. Images of Thomas as a child, gap-toothed and grinning, as a teenager, proudly holding his science fair ribbon, as a young man at his college graduation, Robert and I flanking him, our faces alight with pride. What had happened to that boy? When? Had he transformed from the child who brought home injured birds to nurse back to health, into a man who could orchestrate false medical testimony against his mother? The gulf between who he had been and who he had become seemed unbridgeable. My phone rang, startling me from my reverie. Thomas's name appeared on the screen. With trepidation, I answered. "Mom." His voice sounded strained, lacking the confident, controlling tone I'd grown accustomed to. "We need to talk." "I'm listening," I replied cautiously. "Not over the phone. Can I come by tomorrow, around 10? I hesitated, reluctant to meet him without Catherine or Sarah present. "I'm not sure that's wise, Thomas, given the legal situation." "Please, Mom." Something in his voice, a vulnerability I hadn't heard in years, gave me pause. Just a conversation. "You can record it if you want, have your attorney review it, whatever makes you comfortable. But I need to speak with you directly." Against my better judgment, perhaps, I agreed. After hanging up, I immediately called Sarah to inform her of the meeting. She insisted on sending her paralegal, David, to be present as a witness. "He'll wait outside your door if you prefer privacy, but I want someone there who can intervene, if necessary, or at least document what transpires." The next morning, I prepared for Thomas's visit with the same nervous energy I might have devoted to an important job interview. I chose my clothing carefully, a simple but smart outfit that projected competence and dignity. I arranged the living room to maximize the physical distance between us, positioning my chair near the apartment's landline phone for added security. David, Sarah's paralegal, arrived at 9:45, a serious young man with kind eyes and a reassuring demeanor. We agreed he would remain in the kitchen, out of sight but within earshot. At precisely 10, the doorbell rang. Thomas stood in the hallway, his appearance shocking me momentarily. Gone was the polished executive I'd grown accustomed to seeing. This Thomas looked haggard, with shadows beneath his eyes and a rumpled quality to his typically immaculate clothing. He seemed to have aged years in the weeks since our confrontation. "Mom," he greeted me, his voice subdued. He made no move to embrace me, perhaps sensing my wariness. "Come in, Thomas." I stepped aside, leading him to the living room. You like coffee?" "No, thank you." He settled onto the sofa, perching uncomfortably at its edge, much as Maria had done during her clandestine visit. "I'll get straight to the point. This situation has gotten out of hand." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "The lawyers, the court filings, the medical evaluations. It's not what I wanted. It's not what Dad would have wanted." The mention of Robert sent a flare of anger through me. "Don't presume to speak for your father, Thomas. Not when you've violated everything he stood for." He flinched visibly. "That's fair. I deserve that." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Mom, I've made a terrible mess of things. Worse than you even know." Something in his demeanor, a defeated quality I'd never associated with my ambitious son, made me lean forward slightly. "What do you mean?" "The investments I made with your money. They weren't just unauthorized. They were desperate attempts to cover other losses, bad decisions I'd made with our own finances." "Your finances?" I echoed. "I don't understand." Thomas's gaze dropped to his hands, which were clasped tightly in his lap. "Jennifer and I have been living beyond our means for years. The house in Oak Ridge, the cars, the country club membership, private schools for the kids. It all looked perfect on the surface, but we were drowning in debt. I thought of their seemingly charmed life, the elegant dinner parties, the luxury vacations, the designer wardrobes, all of it a facade, apparently. Harold helped initially," Thomas continued, "paid the down payment on the house, covered the country club initiation fees, but he expected me to maintain that lifestyle on my own, to earn my place in the Summers family. When I couldn't keep up, I started making increasingly risky investments, trying to close the gap. And when those failed, you turned to my accounts," I concluded, the pieces finally fitting together. This hadn't been simple greed, it had been desperation. He nodded miserably. "I told myself it was temporary, that I'd replace everything once my investments paid off, that I was protecting you from worry. But that was all rationalization. The truth is, I was stealing from my own mother to maintain an image, to keep Jennifer's family from seeing me as a failure." The raw honesty of his confession caught me off guard. I had expected denials, perhaps further manipulation, certainly not this open acknowledgement of wrongdoing. "Why are you telling me this now, Thomas?" He looked up, his eyes, so like Robert's, swimming, with unshed tears. "Because I can't do this anymore. The lies, the schemes, the person I've become. Yesterday, I overheard Emily practicing what Jennifer had taught her to say about you. My 8-year-old daughter, being coached to lie about her grandmother to help secure a favorable court ruling. It was like seeing myself from the outside for the first time, and I didn't recognize that person. I remained cautious, aware this could be yet another manipulation. What about the medical testimony Harold arranged? The specialist who would evaluate me without meeting me?" Surprise flickered across his face. "How did you—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Never mind. Yes, that was part of the plan. Along with financial experts who would testify that you had made irrational investment decisions, requiring my intervention. All of it orchestrated by Harold and his connections. And now? Now I want out." His voice strengthened with resolve. Out of the court case, out of the lies, out of the entire toxic dynamic with Jennifer's family. I spoke with Sarah Mitchell this morning. I've agreed to return every dollar I took from your accounts, with interest. to rescind all claims about your competence, to provide a full accounting of where the money went. The sudden reversal left me speechless. After weeks of escalating conflict, of legal maneuvers and manipulative schemes, this abrupt capitulation seemed almost too convenient to believe. Why should I trust this change of heart, Thomas? You shouldn't, he admitted. I've given you no reason to trust me. All I can offer is action, not promises. The first transfer has already been made, $50,000 returned to your primary account. Sarah has the documentation. That detail, specific, verifiable, suggested this might indeed be genuine. But questions remained. And Jennifer? The Summers family? They're simply accepting this surrender? Thomas's expression darkened. No, they're furious. Jennifer and I had a massive fight last night after I told her my decision. She's currently at her parents' house with the children. Harold called this morning to remind me of all I stand to lose. My position at the firm, my standing in the community, possibly even my marriage. And yet you're here, I observed. I'm here because continuing down that path meant losing something even more important, my integrity. Whatever remains of it. He met my gaze directly. And because I made a promise to Dad that I've broken. In every possible way. I can't undo what I've done, Mom, but I can stop making it worse. The mention of his promise to Robert, to look after me, hung in the air between us. I studied my son's face, searching for signs of deception, finding instead a profound weariness and what appeared to be genuine remorse. What happens now? I asked finally. Legally, I've instructed Hamilton to withdraw all petitions questioning your competence. Sarah is preparing documentation for me to sign, formally acknowledging the unauthorized use of your funds and establishing a repayment schedule. Personally. He trailed off, uncertainty clouding his features. I don't know. Jennifer may file for divorce. Harold will certainly ensure I lose my position at the firm. The future is unclear, except for one thing. I'm done living by their values. The magnitude of what he was sacrificing, his marriage, his career, his social standing, to make this right struck me forcefully. This wasn't a token gesture. It was a complete upending of the life he had constructed. And the children? I asked, my primary concern as always. Pain flashed across his face. That's the hardest part. If Jennifer and I separate, there will be custody issues. The Summers family has significant resources and influence, but I promise you this, Mom. Whatever happens, I will ensure you remain part of Emily and Ryan's lives. They need their grandmother, especially now. We talked for nearly 2 hours, covering practical matters and emotional terrain alike. Thomas explained the full extent of his financial mismanagement, both of my accounts and his own. He detailed the gradual influence of the Summers family values, how the pursuit of status and appearance had overtaken everything he once held dear. He spoke of his grief after Robert's death, grief he had suppressed in his determination to project strength and control. Dad was my moral compass, he admitted. When he died, I lost my way completely. It was easier to focus on acquiring things, on impressing others, than to face how much I missed him, how much I needed his guidance. As our conversation drew to a close, Thomas rose to leave, hesitating by the door. I don't expect forgiveness. Mom, what I've done is unforgivable, but I am deeply, profoundly sorry. I studied him, this broken, humbled version of my son, and felt the first tentative stirrings of hope. Not for an immediate restoration of trust, certainly, but for the possibility that the values Robert and I had tried to instill might yet resurface, might yet guide him back toward the person he was meant to be. Forgiveness takes time, Thomas. So does rebuilding trust. But acknowledging the wrong is the first step, and you've taken that today. After he left, David emerged from the kitchen where he had remained throughout the conversation. a silent witness to this unexpected turning point. "Mrs. Wilson," he said quietly, "Ms. Mitchell asked me to confirm if you'd like her to proceed with the arrangements Mr. Wilson discussed. The withdrawal of petitions, the repayment agreement." "Yes," I confirmed. "Assuming the first transfer he mentioned has indeed been made." "It has. I received confirmation while you were talking. $50,000 deposited to your account this morning." The concrete evidence of Thomas's sincerity, funds already returned, not just promised, settled. Something within me? Perhaps this truly was a breakthrough, rather than another manipulation. The following days brought a flurry of legal activity. Hamilton, Reed & Associates filed formal notices withdrawing all claims regarding my competence. Sarah prepared a comprehensive settlement agreement documenting the full amount Thomas had taken and establishing a repayment schedule. Judge Simmons was notified that both parties sought to cancel the upcoming hearing. Through Sarah, I learned that Thomas had indeed suffered significant consequences for his decision to make amends. Harold Summers had terminated his position at the investment firm immediately. Jennifer had filed for legal separation, citing irreconcilable differences and seeking full custody of the children. The Summers family's influence meant these developments were handled quietly, with no public acknowledgement of the underlying financial misconduct. But Thomas's professional and personal life had imploded nonetheless. A week after our meeting, Thomas called again. "The settlement agreement is signed," he said without preamble. "Sarah should have it by now. Another $75,000 was transferred this morning." "Thank you," I replied, still maintaining emotional distance despite his apparent reformation. "How are you holding up?" A hollow laugh. "I'm staying in an extended stay hotel near the highway, looking for work, though Harold has ensured that's an uphill battle in this town. Seeing Emily and Ryan for supervised visits twice a week, which is..." His voice caught. Difficult to say the least. The cost of his choices, both the original misconduct and the subsequent decision to make amends, was clearly devastating. Yet beneath the pain in his voice, I detected something else. A steadiness, a clarity that had been absent in our interactions for years. "Mom," he continued after a moment, "I know it's a lot to ask, but would you be willing to speak with Emily? And Ryan? They're confused about why they can't see me normally, why I'm not living at home. Jennifer has told them I did something bad with money, which isn't wrong, but it's left them with questions I'm not sure how to answer." The request placed me in a delicate position. I had no desire to damage the children's relationship with either parent, yet I felt they deserved some version of the truth, presented in an age-appropriate way. "What are you hoping I'll tell them?" I asked cautiously. "The truth, in whatever form you think they can understand. That I made serious mistakes, that I'm trying to fix them, that none of this is their fault, and that all the adults in their lives love them, even if we're struggling right now." His willingness to have me present the situation honestly, rather than spinning a narrative that portrayed him more favorably, suggested a genuine commitment to change. Still, I proceeded carefully. "I'll need Jennifer's permission as well. I won't put the children in the middle of your conflict." "I understand. I'll speak with her, or have my attorney reach out if she won't talk to me directly." To my surprise, Jennifer agreed relatively quickly to a supervised visit with the children at a neutral location, a small ice cream parlor near Willow Creek Park. Her conditions were explicit: no discussion of the legal proceedings, no attempting to influence the children against either parent, no promises about future living arrangements. Emily and Ryan arrived with their maternal grandmother, Patricia Summers, a thin, elegant woman who had always treated me with polite disinterest at family gatherings. She nodded stiffly as the children ran to embrace me. "I'll return in 1 hour," she stated, her tone making it clear this arrangement was not her preference. "Jennifer has asked that you respect the boundaries she established." "Of course," I agreed, focusing my attention on Emily and Ryan, who were already examining the ice cream selection with the serious concentration only children can devote to such decisions. Once they had their treats, chocolate chip cookie dough for Emily, mint chocolate chip for Ryan, we settled at a small table near the window. Their initial excitement at seeing me gradually gave way to the questions I knew were weighing on them. "Daddy doesn't live with us anymore," Ryan stated matter-of-factly, chocolate smeared at the corner of his mouth. "He lives in a hotel with a swimming pool, but the water's too cold." "Mommy says he did something bad with money," Emily added, her expression troubled. "Grandpa Summers says Daddy is irresponsible and weak." The harshness of Harold's assessment, apparently expressed within earshot of the children, saddened me deeply. "Your father made some mistakes," I acknowledged carefully. "Grown-up mistakes about money that he's now trying to fix." "Is that why you and Daddy were fighting?" Emily asked, her perception as sharp as ever. "Because of the money mistakes?" I nodded, maintaining eye contact with both children. "Your daddy took some money that belonged to me without asking. That made me very sad and angry. But now he's returning it and apologizing, which is the right thing to do when you've made a mistake." Ryan considered this, his small face scrunched in concentration. "Like when I took Emily's bracelet without asking and she got mad, and then I had to give it back and say sorry?" "Very similar, yes," I confirmed, grateful for the childlike analogy that made the situation comprehensible without demonizing their father. "But you and Daddy still love each other, right?" Emily pressed, her eyes wide with concern. "Because Mommy says she doesn't know if she loves Daddy anymore after what he did." The question pierced my heart. These children were grappling with the potential dissolution of their family, trying to make sense of adult complexities far beyond their years. "Love is complicated, sweetheart," I said gently. "Sometimes people can love each other but still be very angry or disappointed with each other's choices. What I know for certain is that both your parents love you very, very much. And I love all of you, your mom and dad and both of you, no matter what." They seemed satisfied with this response, returning their attention to their rapidly melting ice cream. We spent the remaining time on lighter topics: their school projects, Ryan's soccer team, Emily's piano lessons. When Patricia returned, precisely 1 hour later, the children seemed more settled, less anxious than when they had arrived. "Grandma Wilson says Daddy made mistakes, but he's fixing them," Emily informed Patricia as we prepared to leave. "And she still loves everybody." Patricia's carefully composed expression flickered briefly, revealing surprise and perhaps a grudging respect. "How lovely," she replied, her tone neutral but not unkind. "Say goodbye now, children. Your mother is waiting at home." After they left, I remained at the table, reflecting on the visit. The children's resilience was heartening, but the situation remained deeply painful for everyone involved. Thomas was attempting to rebuild his life from the ground up. Jennifer was navigating her own sense of betrayal and disillusionment, and Emily and Ryan were caught in the turbulence of their parents' choices. As for me, I had regained control of my finances and cleared my name of the false accusations against my competence, but at what cost? My son's marriage, my grandchildren's stable home, the family unit we had once been, however imperfect. Victories often carry hidden losses, and this one was no exception. The following Sunday, I returned to the small church Robert and I had attended for decades. I had drifted away after his death, finding the familiar pews and hymns too painful without him beside me. But now, seeking solace and perspective, I felt drawn back to the community that had supported us through so many of life's transitions. Pastor Michael greeted me warmly at the door. "Maggie, what a joy to see you back with us." The service offered a comforting rhythm of prayers and readings, the sermon focusing on forgiveness, not as a single act, but as an ongoing process, a daily choice to release resentment and create space for healing. It wasn't a magical solution to the complex situation with Thomas, but it provided a framework for moving forward, for finding meaning beyond the pain. After the service, I lingered in the garden outside, enjoying the spring flowers that had begun to bloom. My phone chimed with a text message from Thomas. Settlement payment the Drew 3 processed yesterday. Should be in your account Monday. Hope you're doing well. Brief, businesslike, focused on the practical matter of repayment, yet the simple "hope you're doing well" suggested a tentative reaching out, an acknowledgement of my humanity beyond our legal arrangements. I sat on a bench beneath a flowering dogwood tree, composing my response carefully. Received. Thank you. The children seemed to benefit from our talk yesterday. They're resilient, but they need stability and honesty from all the adults in their lives right now. His reply came quickly. Agreed. Working on that every day. One step at a time. One step at a time. It was as good a philosophy as any for navigating this new reality. Thomas was taking steps toward accountability, toward redemption. Jennifer and her family were taking steps to protect themselves and the children from further turmoil. I was taking steps toward financial security and emotional healing. None of us could see the full path forward, how relationships might be rebuilt, how trust might be restored, how the deep wounds of betrayal might eventually scar over. But steps were being taken, however tentative, however painful. As I left the church garden that day, I carried with me a cautious hope, not for an immediate resolution or a storybook reconciliation, but for the possibility that from these broken pieces, something new and authentic might eventually emerge. Something built on honesty rather than appearances, on genuine values rather than status symbols, on the enduring love that had been Robert's final gift to all of us. The journey ahead would be long and uncertain, but I was no longer fighting simply to defend myself against Thomas's schemes. I was walking alongside a son who had lost his way and was struggling, step by painful step, to find it again. And that, however difficult, felt like progress worth embracing. 6 months can change everything. The spring flowers had given way to summer heat, then autumn colors, and now the first hints of winter frost sparkled on the grass outside my window. In that time, the legal battles had been fully resolved. Thomas had kept his word, returning every dollar he had taken from my accounts with interest. The court had officially dismissed all proceedings, closing this painful chapter from a legal perspective, if not an emotional one. My financial security was restored, but the family landscape had been permanently altered. Thomas and Jennifer's separation had become a divorce, finalized with surprising speed due to the Summers family's desire to distance themselves from the situation. Thomas had moved into a small apartment near the community college where he had found work teaching business courses, a position far removed from his former status at the Summers investment firm, but one he spoke of with unexpected satisfaction. The students challenge me, he told me during one of our cautious, still formal Sunday phone calls. They ask the questions no one at the firm ever dared to ask. About ethics in finance, about the human costs of certain business practices. It's humbling and enlightening at the same time. Jennifer had maintained primary custody of Emily and Ryan, with Thomas seeing them every other weekend and one evening per week. The acrimony of the initial separation had gradually softened into a workable co-parenting arrangement, due in large part to Jennifer's own disillusionment with her family's handling of the situation. She's changed too, Thomas explained during one of our conversations. Watching her father's ruthless approach to our divorce, his willingness to use the children as leverage, it opened her eyes to aspects of her upbringing she'd never questioned before. My own relationship with Jennifer remained complicated. She had never directly apologized for her role in the attempts to have me declared incompetent, but she had gradually lifted restrictions on my time with the children. First allowing supervised visits, then unsupervised afternoons, and eventually weekend sleepovers at my apartment. It was an unspoken acknowledgement of wrong, a tacit permission for our healing to begin. As for Thomas and me, we were rebuilding, brick by careful brick. Trust, once shattered, cannot be instantly restored. But each repayment, each honest conversation, each moment of genuine remorse added another layer to the foundation we were reconstructing. The most significant breakthrough came in late October, 7 months after our confrontation. Thomas had asked if he could accompany me to place flowers on Robert's grave for his birthday. It would be the first time we had visited the cemetery together since the funeral. The autumn day was crisp and clear, maple leaves creating a carpet of gold and crimson across the carefully maintained grounds. We walked in silence, each lost in private thoughts, until we reached Robert's headstone. Simple, elegant, just as he would have wanted. I arranged the bouquet of lilies, his favorite, while Thomas stood slightly apart, his expression unreadable. When I stepped back, he moved forward, placing a small, smooth stone on top of the headstone in the Jewish tradition, though our family wasn't Jewish. The gesture puzzled me until he spoke. "Dad explained this to me once," he said quietly. He said in Jewish tradition, stones are placed instead of flowers because stones last. They represent the permanence of memory, the enduring impact of a life well lived. He looked at me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I want to remember him properly, Mom. To honor what he taught me, what you both taught me, before I lost my way." The simple sincerity of the moment pierced through the careful distance I had maintained. Here was my son, not the polished executive, corrupted by wealth and status, but the thoughtful boy Robert and I had raised, finding his way back to himself. "He would be proud of you now, Thomas," I said, surprising even myself with the words. "Not of what you did before, but of the courage it's taken to face the consequences, to rebuild with honesty." He shook his head slightly. "I betrayed everything he stood for, broke my promise to him, used his death as an opportunity to take advantage of you. What could he possibly be proud of in that?" "The return," I said simply. "Not everyone who wanders from their values finds their way back. Your father believed in redemption, in the possibility that people can recognize their mistakes and choose a different path. That's what you're doing now." We stood together at the grave, the autumn wind rustling through the remaining leaves. Overhead, sharing a moment of connection that felt like the first truly authentic exchange we'd had in years. On the drive back, Thomas spoke of his new life. Modest, unadorned, focused on rebuilding relationships rather than acquiring status. He had joined a support group for divorced fathers, was attending financial management classes, had even volunteered to coach Ryan's soccer team. "I'm not doing any of this to earn forgiveness," he clarified, as if reading my thoughts. "I know that has to be earned over time, if it's possible at all. I'm doing it because for the first time in years, I recognize myself when I look in the mirror." Thanksgiving approached, bringing the question of holiday arrangements. In previous years, this would have meant elaborate dinners at the Summers estate, carefully orchestrated to project wealth and status rather than genuine connection. Now, everything was different. "Jennifer has invited me to join them for lunch," Thomas explained during our weekly call. "For the children's sake. Then they're going to her parents' place for dinner. I was wondering, would you like to have Thanksgiving evening together? Just you and me, nothing fancy. We could order takeout, watch an old movie, keep it simple." The invitation touched me deeply. Not just the thoughtfulness of including me when he would otherwise be alone, but the emphasis on simplicity, on connection over appearance. It reflected a shift in values that suggested his transformation might be genuine and lasting. "I'd like that very much," I told him. "And Thomas, Catherine will be visiting. I hope it's all right if she joins us." A brief pause. "Of course. I owe her an apology as well. She tried to protect you from me, and she was right to do so." Thanksgiving Day arrived cold and bright. I spent the morning baking pumpkin bread, Robert's favorite holiday treat. and preparing Catherine for the evening ahead. She remained more skeptical of Thomas's redemption than I was, her protective instincts still on high alert. "Just be careful, Maggie," she cautioned as we set the table. "People can put on a good show when it serves their interests." "I am being careful," I assured her. "But I also believe in the possibility of genuine change. I've seen it in his actions these past months, not just his words." Thomas arrived promptly at 6, carrying a grocery bag and wearing a simple sweater and slacks rather than the designer attire that had once been his uniform. The awkwardness was palpable as he greeted Catherine, accepting her cool reception with humility. "I brought sweet potatoes and green beans," he said, setting the bag on the counter. "I remember Dad always insisted on green beans with the little fried onions on top." "He did," I confirmed, touched by the memory. "He said it wasn't Thanksgiving without them." We prepared the meal together, a simple affair of rotisserie chicken. None of us had wanted to cook a whole turkey for just 3 people. The vegetables Thomas had brought, my pumpkin bread, and store-bought pie. Not elaborate, not impressive, but nourishing in more ways than one. The conversation started cautiously, with safe topics like the children's school activities and Catherine's work. But as the meal progressed, Thomas addressed the elephant in the room directly. "I owe you both an apology," he said, setting down his fork. "Catherine, you saw what I was doing to Mom long before she did. You tried to intervene, and I resented you for it. Painted you as an interfering outsider. I was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry." Catherine studied him, her expression softening slightly. "I appreciate that, Thomas. But it's your mother who deserves the real apology and the real change." "I know." He turned to me, his gaze steady. "Mom, I've said I'm sorry in words, and I've been trying to show it in actions these past months. But I want to say it again, clearly. What I did was unforgivable. Taking advantage of your trust, stealing your financial security, then trying to have you declared incompetent to cover my tracks. There's no excuse for any of it." "Why did you do it, Thomas?" Catherine asked, the question I had often wondered but never directly posed. "Really, at the core, what made you become someone who could do that to your own mother?" He considered the question carefully, not rushing to a superficial answer. "Fear," he said finally. "Fear of not measuring up, of being exposed as inadequate. When I married Jennifer, I entered a world where worth was measured by possessions, by appearances, by status. I wasn't earning enough to maintain the lifestyle her family expected. Rather than admit that, rather than live authentically within our means, I started cutting corners. Small ethical compromises at first, then larger ones. And after your father died, I prompted. His death should have been a wake-up call. Instead, it became an opportunity. With him gone, there was no one holding me to his standards. No one reminding me of the values I'd been raised with. And you were vulnerable, grieving. I told myself I was protecting you by managing your finances, but in reality, I was exploiting your trust during the time you needed me most." His voice cracked slightly. That's the part I'm most ashamed of. The raw honesty of his self-assessment moved me deeply. This wasn't the practiced contrition of someone merely trying to repair his image. This was the painful self-awareness of genuine transformation. After dinner, we moved to the living room with cups of tea, the conversation turning to memories of Robert, of family moments before status and wealth had corrupted our relationships. For the first time in years, we laughed together over old stories. Robert's infamous attempt to build a treehouse that collapsed during its grand unveiling, my disastrous experiment with home-permed hair in the 1980s, Thomas's brief but passionate childhood determination to become a professional magician. When Thomas left that evening, something had shifted between us. Not a full restoration of trust, that would take much longer, but a tentative step toward a new kind of relationship. One based on honesty rather than manipulation, on acceptance rather than performance, on genuine connection rather than obligation. The holiday season unfolded with a series of small, meaningful moments. Thomas and I went Christmas shopping for Emily and Ryan together, selecting thoughtful gifts that reflected their interests rather than flashy items to impress. Jennifer invited me to the children's holiday concert at school, saving me a seat beside her, a public acknowledgement of my place in their lives. Thomas and I established a new Sunday tradition of having breakfast at a small diner near his apartment before attending church together. Not the prestigious congregation the Summers family had patronized, but the simple community church where Robert and I had belonged for decades. On Christmas Eve, Jennifer surprised me by inviting me to join them for the opening of presents the following morning. "The children want all their grandparents together," she explained, a tentative olive branch in her voice. "My parents will be there too." The prospect of facing Harold and Patricia Summers after everything that had transpired was daunting, but for the sake of Emily and Ryan, I agreed. Christmas morning found me knocking on the door of the house that had once represented everything wrong with Thomas's value system, the house my money had helped finance without my knowledge or consent. Jennifer answered, dressed simply in jeans and a festive sweater rather than the designer attire she once would have considered essential for any family gathering. "Merry Christmas, Margaret," she greeted me, with genuine warmth that surprised us both. "The children are so excited you're here." The living room had been transformed since my last visit. Gone were many of the ostentatious decorations and status symbols that had once dominated the space. The Christmas tree was decorated with handmade ornaments alongside store-bought ones. A children's art table occupied a prominent spot by the window, and family photos, including several of Robert and me, had replaced the abstract art selected to impress visitors. Harold and Patricia Summers were already seated, their discomfort evident as I entered. The dynamic was awkward, layers of unspoken history hanging in the air, but for the children's sake, we all maintained a veneer of civility. Thomas arrived shortly after me, greeting his former in-laws with polite restraint. As Emily and Ryan tore into their presence with typical childhood enthusiasm, I found myself observing the adults instead. Harold, still stiffly formal but no longer radiating the domineering authority I remembered. Patricia, watching her grandchildren with genuine affection that transcended the family conflict. Jennifer, more relaxed and natural than I had ever seen her. And Thomas, sitting cross-legged on the floor helping Ryan assemble a new train set, fully present in a way the status-conscious executive he had been never could have been. We had all been changed by this experience, broken in some ways, but perhaps remade stronger along the fracture lines, like the Japanese art of kintsugi that repairs broken pottery with gold, celebrating the history of the object rather than disguising it. Later, as we shared a simple brunch, Emily presented me with a carefully wrapped package. Inside was a framed drawing, a family portrait showing Thomas, Jennifer, the children, me, and even the Summers' grandparents, all standing together beneath a banner that read, "Our Family." "See, Grandma?" she explained earnestly. "Even though things are different now, we're still all family, just in a new way." Out of the mouths of babes comes wisdom adults often struggle to grasp. We were family, reconfigured, scarred by betrayal and conflict, still negotiating the boundaries of our new relationships, but family nonetheless. The path forward would not be smooth or straight. Trust would be rebuilt slowly, if ever completely. Old hurts would occasionally resurface, requiring renewed forgiveness and patience. But as I looked around at these imperfect people trying their best to create something authentic from the ruins of pretense, I felt Robert's presence as strongly as if he were standing beside me. He had always believed in the possibility of redemption, in the capacity of people to learn from their mistakes and choose a better way forward. Perhaps this new, honest version of our family was his final gift to us all. The opportunity to discover what truly matters, to distinguish between the trappings of success and the substance of a life well lived. As Emily had so wisely observed, we were family in a new way now. And that way, however challenging, felt infinitely more real than the perfect facade we had once presented to the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.